Hey folks, in this video, let's talk about the progress India has made on literacy. First, literacy here means a person can both read and write simple sentences. On this basic metric, soon after India got its independence, India was in a very bad shape. Less than a fifth of its population literate. From such depths of illiteracy, the recent 2023-24 PLFS Public Labor Force Survey revealed that India has made great progress. Over 80% of India's population is now considered literate. There are problems, of course. There are regional inequalities, urban rural divide, gaps based on gender, and we'll talk about them later. For now, or first, let's see how India's literacy rate compares with other major global players. So you can see countries like China and Russia, regions like Western Europe, G7 are doing significantly better when you compare it with India. US literacy rate appears low and for a reason. In the beginning, we established that basic literacy means a person can both read and write simple sentences. This is not the metric that United States uses. This is the metric that countries like India and some others use to measure literacy. But what US uses is functional literacy. So what's the difference? Functional literacy is having the skills sufficient to accomplish relatively complex tasks, not just basic reading or writing. For example, reading a bus timetable and figuring out which bus to take to reach your destination by 8 a.m., let's say, or comparing nutritional labels and choosing a food item that contains less sugar, so on and so forth. It is not just being able to read or write. Can you make use of that skill to make decisions regarding your day to day life? So, one can see why then the US appears to score low on literacy when compared with its peers. Anyways, the point is, India has come a long way on literacy since independence. It still has a long way to go. One would naturally surmise then, as a next step, that all these countries are doing better than India on literacy because they may be spending more on education as a share of the GDP. But when we check the data, that is, how much they are spending on education as a share of GDP, guess what we find? Compared to many nations on this list, India clearly spends a lower amount on education. Sweden and Finland are standouts. Compared to them, India spends very little, but it's not that far off from what China spends. Still, China appears to demonstrate better educational results than us. So, we need to ask, is India's spending on education efficient? It is certainly not that low. You may be misled by the headlines that say the center spends very little on education. But when you add up spending on education by central, state, and local governments in India, it does go above 4% of the GDP. So we need to take a closer look at how are we spending this money earmarked for education. All right, now let's talk about some of the inequalities in India's progress on literacy. There are regional inequalities. You can see some states have over 95% literacy rate, whereas some of the other are not even touching 75%. And at every level, there is urban rural divide and there is gender based divide. At a national level, male literacy is over 10 percentage point better than female literacy. Similar gap is observed between urban and rural literacy rates. Urban areas are doing better. If we look deeper into the bottom three states going by the literacy rates, gaps are even more apparent. In Rajasthan, the gap between male and female literacy crosses 20%. In rural areas of these states, the gap between male and female literacy is even wider. On the other hand, look at the top states. There is barely any literacy gap based on gender in Kerala and Mizoram. So you can see India has made great strides on literacy since independence, but there is quite a bit of unevenness in this progress. So India needs to focus on female literacy first, then prioritize rural literacy. India's goal should be to achieve over 95% overall literacy in less than a decade, and then start thinking about what we need to do to adopt a more complete measure of literacy, functional literacy. We can also say maybe increase spending on education as a share of the GDP. But Indians are reluctant to pay direct taxes. So the government is working with very few resources to begin with. But we can maybe look at more effective ways of spending what we already are on education. I hope you found this analysis interesting. I'll speak with you again next week. Until then, take care.